All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. President Donald Trump's long-threatened blanket tariffs are now in effect, and they're already having an impact on us right here in Indiana. Stellantis has announced it will temporarily lay off up to 900 workers. At least some of them will be at the Kokomo plant. Meanwhile, GM says it will increase production at its Fort Wayne truck plant. Both announcements came after President Trump announced 25% tariffs on auto imports. Now, Congressman Andre Carson says the tariffs are bad news for low-income Hoosiers and farmers. He also says they could drive U.S.-aligned countries into closer relationships with our adversaries. He talked to our government reporter, Garrett Berquist.
And let's bring in Congressman Andre Carson. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So since the tariff announcement, Stellantis has announced that it will lay off some employees at its Kokomo plant, but GM has announced that it will increase production at its Fort Wayne truck assembly. So given those two outcomes so far, does that suggest a more mixed outcome with these tariffs than either their supporters or their critics anticipated?
Well, it's always heartbreaking to hear about folks being laid off. I mean, it just breaks my heart. I think whatever the outcome of the president's forthcoming trade actions, one thing is crystal clear. President Trump doesn't take the threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party seriously enough. I serve on the House committee that addresses the threats from the Chinese Communist Party. These threats are very, very real. President Trump's tariffs are untargeted across the board in terms of our allies, our partners, our friends. It will effectively harm American families, even our own economy, far more than they hurt adversaries like China.
So far, economists have projected that the additional cost for families could be anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a year from these tariffs. How do you see that impacting your constituents in particular, such as in areas such as the east side of Indianapolis?
Well, I'm deeply concerned. That's a great question. I mean, as you know, we have food deserts in our district. We should be using tariffs to protect Hoosier industries, Hoosier families, American families and workers from China's predatory trade practices. Those tariffs should be implemented to push the Chinese Communist Party to end its economic coercion and human rights abuses. This administration's lack of a strategy is going to hurt family budgets, American businesses, Hoosier businesses, and really endanger our standing on the global economic stage by punishing our closest partners and allies.
Now, the White House claims that some countries are charging an effective tariff rate of as high as 99%, and they draw those numbers from what they call currency manipulation and trade barriers. They call this an effort to get a fairer deal for American exporters. Do you buy that argument?
Well, I think what is clear is that these tariffs are pushing the rest of the world closer to our adversaries at the expense of Hoosier and American families and businesses. I always say our adversaries are listening. The Chinese Communist Party is closely watching our decisions, waiting for any mistake it can exploit and expand its reach and surpass us. The president and his administration must work with Congress to create meaningful and durable bipartisan solutions to the threats posed by the CCP, our country, and American families.
Well, President Biden did keep some of those tariffs in place during his presidency.
Sure. Well, I think because of that, we're going to see tariff whiplash. is causing uncertainty in farming and manufacturing and retail and energy sectors. Tariffs could increase prices on everything from the food we eat to the fuel we put in our vehicles. Economists estimate that these tariffs will cost the average American family somewhere between $1,600 to over $2,000 per year. And that cost burden falls harder on middle and working class families, unfortunately. And I think that these new taxes will also be a disaster for farmers in Indiana who benefited from the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, $30 billion in U.S. produced agricultural goods could be on the hook because of retaliatory tariffs.
I also want to get your reaction to reports of the firings of several National Security Council employees and NSA Director and U.S. Cyber Command Commander General Timothy Hogg. From what you know as a member of the House Intelligence Committee, what led to those firings?
I think it's concerning. Obviously, the signal controversy exposed very serious breaches in our national security apparatus. The Trump administration has been trying to gaslight the American public, basically saying this was not a national security concern, but he wound up firing the National Security Council officials. So he apparently changed his mind after a 30-minute meeting. But if he's listening to conspiracy theorists visiting the White House, like Laura Loomer, and then firing General Hall, a decorated military officer and a remarkable public servant, that's cause for concern. It tells me there's really no strategy when it comes to our national security. You can't plan games. There are processes and procedures in place for a reason, and that reason is to keep Americans safe.
Why should this matter to people outside the Beltway?
It means that our grids are at risk. It means that our elections are at risk. It means that we could see an increase in the influence coming from state and non-state actors on social media platforms. Our power grids are exposed. Some of our cloud services are exposed. But, you know, I question our nation's top national security advisors at the House Intelligence hearing on a variety of national security threats. And, you know, we've been warning about vetting individuals who are to run our government, particularly in the security space. So there has to be consequences for the egregious mishandling of military operations and plans by the national security officers, some of the highest in our country.
Well, Governor Mike Braun says that he doesn't think the tariffs mean guaranteed higher prices. He says it's about ensuring trade is fair. The governor talked about the tariffs during a news conference shortly after they were announced.
That's something I can answer with a little bit of experience because I ran a business for 37 years. Here's how tariffs work. Number one, don't assume the prices are going to go up. The exporter and the importer in the short run could very likely eat whatever that tariff is or part of it because they don't want to lose the market. That's one dynamic. You've heard the word reciprocal. Most Hoosiers, most Americans have no idea that basically since World War II, we've had high tariffs slapped on our goods that we'd want to export and have put up with it. Well, we were the only economy that could do it. We helped rebuild Europe. That is now changing because we've had a chronic trade deficit because we've never made this an issue before. So a lot of the tariffs, and if you explain it this way, if they're charging 50% on our dairy products that want to go to Canada, for instance, is that fair? No, it isn't. And we're going to raise a tariff to match it. And our goal would be, why don't we both get rid of our tariffs completely? Then you're at fair and free trade.
All right, coming up, a fired federal worker confronts Senator Jim Banks. Hear the senator's response that drew nationwide criticism. Welcome back. Senator Jim Banks says he's not backing down after he called a fired federal employee a clown. Video of the confrontation drew national attention. Our Farron Franzak talked to the former employee who took the video.
More job cuts are on the way for federal workers at U.S. health agencies, specifically the Department of Health and Human Services. Well, some of those fired HHS employees gathered in the Senate basement out in Washington, D.C., where they spotted Senator Jim Banks Tuesday. One of those men asked Banks about his own firing. News 8's Kyla Russell and I spoke to that fired employee. It's this video that's gone viral. Former Health and Human Services budget analyst Mac asking Indiana Senator Jim Banks Tuesday in the Senate basement what he plans to do with those laid off from HHS.
These are USAID workers. Hi, I was a worker at HHS. I was fired illegally on February 14th. There are many people who are not getting social service programs, especially people with disabilities. Are you going to do anything to stop what's happening?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it.
Dude,
wow. Yeah, that's great to hear. Why did I deserve it?
Because you seem like a clown.
The video sparking reactions on both sides of the aisle. Schroeder says he's been going to the Senate basement for weeks, not for him, but to find out what will happen to the people he can no longer serve.
Specifically, I was supporting programs, the Administration for Community Living, that helped older adults and people with disabilities.
Schroeder says his firing came out of nowhere after the Department of Government Efficiency sent him an email Valentine's Day saying he wasn't meeting performance standards and no longer employed.
Despite having exceptional performance reviews. So it was just sent to thousands of people across the board. And then from there, after that weekend, I was locked out of my equipment and unable to work after that.
Schroeder says he specifically asked Senator Banks how he's going to help his Indiana constituents.
Since there's so many older adults and people with disabilities in every state, I know there are about, I believe, 700,000 people who will lose health services in Indiana from the cuts. I just wanted to speak with him about that. And then the elevator doors just closed, and I didn't get to speak with him after that.
After the video made the rounds on social media, Senator Jim Banks issued this statement, quote, "I went to Washington to decrease the size and scope of the federal government. No one is entitled to a taxpayer-funded job, especially in positions that waste those funds. I fully support President Trump and the Department of Government Efficiency's mission to eliminate waste."
It felt like a very childish kind of attack. I was alarmed and I would say pretty disappointed just to know that he didn't have a response.
Schroeder says this is not a partisan issue because a key part of his job was finding and tracking down Medicare fraud. He says now with the HHS department shrinking, more fraud could happen.
I was a civil servant. I didn't get into this work to really push an agenda forward. And we serve constituents in Indiana that are part of both parties, is really making sure people get their needs met. And if those services aren't being provided, we're going to have a lot of people who are really upset because they've paid, their fair share in taxes and they're not getting what they're entitled to.
Now, it's important to note that the courts have not made a ruling on these employee firings at the HHS. So technically right now, the HHS firings are not illegal. For ITMate, I'm Farron Franzak for Wish TV, wishtv.com, or follow us on Facebook for updates.
All right, coming up, Indiana's Best Political Team looks into how President Trump's tariffs could affect us right here in Indiana. All right, welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's Best Political Team, Republican Allie Bartlett and Democrat Dana Black. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
Let's begin with President Trump's tariffs. Allie, we'll start with you. GM says they're going to increase production at the Fort Wayne plant. Stellantis, however, says they're probably going to lay off some workers. So I guess the question today is that does that suggest that what President Trump is saying about manufacturing might not be accurate?
I don't think that it necessarily means that his statement is inaccurate. I think it means that, as we know, this is going to take some time, right? Like, this is not an overnight solution. And I want to be clear about something. No big change that government ever is going to implement will be effective overnight. There are always going to be growing pains with stuff like this, but we need big transformational policy shifts, and that's what the American people voted for with President Trump. And he is keeping his word to the American people to bring things back home to America. Eventually, in the long run, this is going to create American jobs. It is going to bring things back onshore to the U.S., but it's not going to happen overnight. I think that we're going to see things like you just described. We're going to see fluctuations, good on some, bad on the other, but it's going to be transformational over the long term.
Dana, I'll let you weigh in on that as well, but and I guess I could probably figure out what you're going to say, but do you also think there does need to be some change when it comes to manufacturing?
Yes, I think there needs to be some change. Yeah. However, I know that there's this hope and optimism about these tariffs not being that bad, but we have history on our side. We have seen historically what happens to the United States when we implement these huge tariffs. And each time that we have implemented huge tariffs in the United States, our economy tanked. It's not like you can't find this information. We know that this current administration doesn't care about history. It doesn't care about precedent. It doesn't care about a lot of things. All you have to do is go study it, and you can see what actually happens when you implement these tariffs. And I think the Mexican president speaks very well to this. And she's like, just like you want to bully us, there are other manufacturers. When those recessions happen, when those tariffs happen in history, there were less options in the world. There are now way more options for people to choose from. So if you look at the history of how our economy has suffered under huge tariffs, and the fact that there are other places that people can go to get the exact same goods and services, I really feel like it is going to hurt us in the long run.
Higher prices is what?
Higher prices, and when you consider that people are losing their jobs left and right, who's going to buy the products here in America when the world doesn't buy them?
Ali, your thoughts? I mean, because obviously prices are going to go up. History does tell us that.
I don't think anybody's denying that, yes, at some point prices may go up and we will likely see some inflation, but we also have to fixate on the other policy initiatives that the Trump administration is going to be implementing, and they are separate, but they will go together. They're going to implement sweeping tax cuts. We are saving government funds left and right, which I know we'll talk a bit about the DOGE efforts. Like, these are things that are going to go hand in hand, and there are going to be growing pains, but if we have transformational policy, it's going to pay off in the long run. And I think, Dana, you brought up, about the Mexican president and comments from other world leaders. We have to keep in mind, I think Governor Braun's comments hit on this. This is also a reciprocal tariff effort because we have not been treated fairly in the global economy for years and years. The way that other countries have treated us historically has been just like this. And so for us to turn around and say that this is now bullying, I don't think that's accurate.
But is it worth it to the consumer, though?
I think in the long term, yes. What we're looking at here is transformational. I think we as a country have fixated so heavily on instant feedback, instant gratification, because everybody's always worried about their next election. That's not what Donald Trump has ever been worried about, and he's worried about the long term for the United States of America and bringing things back home.
Donald Trump has never been worried about his next election? Give me a break. We're going to let...
At this point, he doesn't have to worry about it.
I don't know. He's talking about
that third term.
Anyway, we know that he doesn't understand the Constitution either, so we're not going to worry about that.
Boy.
Listen, here's the deal. I could almost, if I didn't have history on my side, I could almost agree with you because you're making a compelling argument. But history tells us what actually happens, and on top of that,
short term though, it tells us that. Right. But here's can we get to the long?
Can we get there? Can we get there?
Well, apparently not, because when we tried it before, it doesn't happen. Here's the other thing.
Because then it's cut off.
Here's the other thing. You talk about how other countries have treated us, and I can't even argue that there probably were some trade imbalances. But look how much our U.S. companies have still grown and profited even with a tariff. It's not like our companies have suffered I'm not even saying that the trade imbalance is a good thing, but I'm saying that we have been able to withstand it because our goods and services have always been good and there have been less competition in the world. Now that there is more competition in the world, us trying to put these tariffs out is going to hurt the businesses who then have to lay off the people.
To your point, they're laying off people. Stellantis announcing layoffs, right? Yeah. But then you have Ford who says we're going to increase production. So how does that play out?
I think
less than a minute.
I think maybe it's because they're importing less raw goods. That may be the difference. We don't know. We don't know the insides.
I think the thing is that eventually we're going to see that all come back home, and that's the point. That long term, this has to be, but it has to continue, and that's the thing. If we can see see this continue beyond 4 years, that's when we might see the shift.
But isn't it hard to tell people, hey, sit and wait, when your job might not have a job tomorrow?
Especially when she said they're cutting taxes. They're not cutting taxes for us, regular working people. It's for the wealthy people, because y'all still believe in that trickle-down nonsense. It's not going to help the people who are trying to go to work every day if the cost of goods go up. I thought this election was about egg prices.
Egg prices did go down in the last week.
No, it's not.
Down substantially in the last
Listen,
week.
they're harming.
If I can get a cheaper omelet, sign me up. Okay, so all right.
I'll make you
Always
one.
good to have you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I bet you make a fantastic omelet.
I do. Honey, my mama.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics this week. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30, and be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.